of which I believe that, every woman in their lives, we have been entrusted or we have been honored with the responsibility of being suitable wives, and I believe that that's something that contributes to the building of healthy marriages. So I think today I want us to not really be too spiritual, even though I believe that marriage is from God, and but I also believe that a human being is made up of three aspects, which is the spirit, the soul, and the body. And I believe that every time when we speak about marriage, in most cases, we emphasize the spiritual part, but we often neglect the soul part or the flesh part, which is very crucial, because when you get married, you give yourself fully and wholly to your person. So when we speak about marriage in its context, when you get married or when you get married to someone, you are marrying their soul, you are marrying their body, you are marrying their spiritual walk. So whenever one of these three aspects within a person's life is disturbed, that's also going to endanger the marriage life in itself and also hinder the goal of building a healthy marriage. Although I do agree that the covenant of marriage is spiritual, but I believe that marriage is lived in the flesh. And I think that's also why there's no marriage in heaven. We know that we get married in the flesh, resign in the flesh, mahadi is the flesh. And, we make babies, that's the flesh. So most of these aspects are done in the flesh. And whenever we speak about marriage, this is where we need to start, because this is where things that affect the flesh affect the marriage. So even if a person can be prayerful and a person can know how to prophesy and spend time in prayer, but for as long as the soul is neglected, for as long as the flesh is neglected, then the marriage in itself is going to be affected as well. So I think today I'm going to be talking about something I know that it plays a huge role in our relationships. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's one topic it's rarely spoken about. I believe that in knowing this topic, it also helps us to know some of the traits that we might have that might hinder not only our spiritual lives, that may not only hinder the relationships that we are in, but that may also hinder us as individuals. I believe that marriage it's a platform, or it's an institution. It requires two people they have the willingness to work on themselves, because I believe that marriage is not a full stop. We don't get married and then we have arrived and everything is fine. Marriage is a process of becoming. So as we get married and we become wives, that's when a lot of who we are, or the uncovered parts of ourselves, maybe I might have struggled with this and I was not aware of it, or you start to realize, or maybe I'm intolerant of this. And the attitude in which we take those things is what will determine whether we are going to be suitable helpers or not. Because a lot of marriages or a lot of wives struggle with things they are blind spots. And the reason why I'm saying it's a blind spot is because how we see ourselves as individuals is not how the other person sees us. That's why you as an individual, you can see yourself in this way, but have different or multiple versions of who you are exist in other people's minds and really different. So you can look at yourself and feel like, I'm so friendly, I'm loving, I'm kind, and someone can come and say, this person is rude, or this person or this person is this and that. And I think those things are what we need to put into consideration whenever we get into relationships, because there's a way in which you see yourself and there's a way in which your spouse experiences you as a person. And before we can build a marriage, we first have to build self-awareness, which is key in marriage, because the moment you start to have self-awareness and the moment you start to understand yourself as a person, you'll be able to know how to give, and you know how to love your spouse in a way it's healthy, and in a way it shows support and it shows respect. Because I know that some things or some traits that we have accumulated as people. I know that I like this other book. It speaks about becoming a different version of yourself in multiple years. So basically the theory of this book is that you are not the same version of self that you were 5 years ago. So with every 5 years, you change. Whether you change for the good or for the bad is dependent on your level of self-awareness and your willingness to work on yourself and become a better version of yourself as an individual. So I'm going to share my screen. I don't even know how to share the screen now. Oh yeah, it's this area here. Start broadcast. Not sure now. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me try to go to the notes. Okay. Yeah. Is that. So yes, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
So I'm gonna just be brief. I'm not gonna be long, Bazalwani, because I only have 30 minutes and I've already used like 7 minutes of that. What I want us to talk about today is pain in marriage. And I want us to talk about pain not as a thing that is bad, but as an experience, it has helped us to transition to become who we are as individuals. Because I highly believe that as people, what you have experienced plays a huge role in your perception in the current, or plays a huge role in how you build relationships. So your ability to build relationships is solely dependent on the kind of attachment that you have, right? And whenever we speak about attachment, we do understand that there are four they exist. Although there has been some they were created under the four main groups, but the four, they normally are the ones that dominate because it's believed that with childhood experiences and with growth, there are attachment styles that are formed. And in women, I'm going to be focusing on women because this is a wife's talk. And in women, there's some that are most common in women. And for a lot of women, they don't know that they have these attachment styles. And therefore, they continue to Google. I know that people like to research. So you find people about Google, how to know that he loves me, how to know that this and that. And if we were to look at it within its context, you'd understand that these people are not only Googling to look for meaning or to find validation, but they're actually Googling to look for themselves. They are trying to validate if what they're feeling is real, which also then takes us back to issues of being secure or being confident in who you are as a person. Because if we are to give in a relationship, you cannot give what you don't have. And if you are to build understanding in a marriage, you cannot build understanding of something that you have not yet cultivated in yourself to start with. I'll make an example. Generally, people by Longhore, they are known to be people pleasers, right? Although the people pleasers term sounds very painful, but I believe that it's used as a verb, not really as a description of who a person is. So it does not label, it doesn't define a person. It just communicates of an act that a person continuously does, which might also show us that this person has internal conflicts where they themselves have not validated who they are. They're not confident in communicating their needs, and therefore they continuously neglect themselves. And when those kinds of people get into relationships, it becomes difficult for them to communicate in a relationship. And because they don't communicate, they end up accumulating all this hurt, and they don't communicate it because they don't know how to communicate. But then the first thing whenever they get into relationships, they learn more about how to keep a partner, but they're not taught how to sustain a relationship. And I think whenever we leave the spiritual realm where we know how to pray, we also come down to look at ourselves and think, okay, there are women in the Bible, they were different. Like we have wives in the Bible, and with every person in the Bible, or different, they have different traits because they had different backgrounds and they had different cultures. And then they had different preferences as well. I know that someone once made an example like Vashti Esther, to say things like, Vashti was so self-centered because, Kosi Namida is a proud husband. To say, guys, my wife is so beautiful, my love, come dance for them, show them. And Vashti refused to go. And some would say, no, but, Esther was better because, she knew how to serve. Some would come and be, oh yeah, Ruth was this because she knew how to do that. But whenever we come to the table of marriage, you'd understand that relationship traits are ambiguous. And normality in a relationship is subjective. So what I feel is normal for me in my relationship might not be normal for some person in their own relationship. The only thing I know is common in relationship, the principles and the spiritual principles and the spiritual order, because then that one can be changed. At the moment we get into the flesh, that's where we deal with these things now, to say that you have a wife in a relationship who doesn't know how to compromise. You have a wife with emotional regulation. So whenever you are angry, you use the silent treatment. Those kinds of things, they are struggles of the flesh, the soul. This is someone who grew up as a regulated emotions, to deal with emotions and to communicate emotions without fearing rejection. So whenever we come to relationships, we deal with these kinds of things. Like these are the little foxes. And the reason why I'm saying is the little foxes is because it's the things that traits that exist within marriages, but we often overlook them. And then but this is how my mind is. But in a relationship, there is no, this is how I am. There is always a point of transitioning. I know that I mentioned previously, you become a different version of yourself every 5 years. So if you are in a position where you are learning, discovering yourself and learning how to love and support your partner better, then you are able to understand and identify these little foxes, they might hinder, the progress of the relationship. They might hinder the peace within the house. Because even when they're small, if they are done consistently, they might end up creating patterns in the relationship, that are toxic. I'll make an example with women by they struggle with communication. And I know that this is something, it happens. It's life. We are women. We are emotional beings. In actual fact, there's a research or there's a book, another book that was written, women are from Mars, men are from Venus, I think. And when you read that book, you understand that there's a distinct difference between men and women. So you understand that women, they put more emphasis of emotions in women because we are tailored emotionally, right? And we've been tailored emotionally means women would often deal or resolve issues emotionally, and men are more logical. Now, in this context, whenever there's a conflict in the house, there is a chance that a pattern might be created where transparency and honesty within the relationship is disturbed because the men can't communicate as her reaction. If I tell the truth, she's going to overreact. If I tell her this, she's going to be angry. If I do this, she's going to give me silent treatment. If I do this, she's going to withdraw from intimacy. So there's always that conflict, but it's not only in women, it's also in men. But I'm going to be speaking on women, but it's also in men where the woman would then also find defense mechanisms where they protect themselves against the reaction of the husband. So these things, give little foxes, but they play a huge role in the relationships and in our marriages. So with these attachment styles, where they start is in childhood, right? They often start in childhood because as people, we have different parents. I know that I had very different parents. My mom had different parents. My cousin had different parents. So every person got different parents. And even in siblings, as siblings, we experience different versions of our parents. Firstborn might experience this kind of a parent or this version of a parent. Secondborn experience the type of a parent. Lastborn or ever experience a more experienced parent from the mistake that they have done with the first and the secondborn. But this does not mean it deletes or it erases the damage or the subconscious patterns of behaviors that is instilled in the firstborn. And the reason I'm saying that is because a large part of our relationship building it's our childhood. That's where we build safety. That's where we build trust. That's where we build how to communicate. That's where we build emotional regulation. Where in a situation where you are crying, you know that your parent is gonna come and say, "Oh, my child is okay. You can cry." Those people, they tend to know how to express emotions better than those by long the parent is like, "Oh, I'm gonna give you something to cry about. I'm gonna beat you up." You know, those kinds of things. Now, with that other one, we feel like no emotions are necessary. The other one, we feel like, oh, emotions are very important because if I cry, then I feel better. So parenting styles play a role in our relation, like in emotional, intimate building, and ultimately leads to marriage. And some of these things, building childhood, we then see the pattern increasing to marriage in our adulthood. So the first one, I want to talk about the parenting styles. Parenting styles, we have authoritative parents, we have the second ones, we have permissive, we have uninvolved. And with these 4 kinds of parents, they all get to raise a different version of a child. So you can have the same child growing up in these different 4 houses, and they would come out a different child in every household, because anxiety, like the one with an uninvolved parent will have anxiety. And the thing with anxiety is that it also goes into relationships, because then that's where you start to doubt a lot, you start to question yourself a lot. Sometimes it leads to low self-esteem because you are just questioning everything, you know. That's where you go out and, you know, you have a conversation with your spouse, maybe about serious things, like maybe you are discussing something, it includes you. And over the whole conversation, all you can think of is, will I do something wrong? Did I do something wrong? Did I mess up? Did I? So that in itself, it shows that there is a certain level of a lack of validation that you had received, and therefore has affected the positive talk that a person would normally have within themselves. And how that will then affect the relationship is, if someone has a continuous pattern of this, they often then start to withdraw emotionally in the relationship. So instead of giving your spouse the whole or all of you in a relationship, you end up giving them bits and pieces of what you think will keep them. But at the same time, it becomes hypocrisy, because if someone has to love you and has to love all of you as they've taken the spirit, the soul, and the body, if they cannot know all of you, then how can they love you? You understand? And it also then spills out to the other partner, because it with the uninvolved and the permissive parenting, it also has an outcome where the child or the wife will then start to think for the husband, you know. That's where you call the husband has for a phone, and you know, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, what she or so the first thing, you know, what it always aligned to the kind of emotional attachment that you have with your spouse. A person who is secure, the first thing that they would think is, oh, maybe he's waking, you know. And it also questions one rata and rate. You often want, you know, the affirmation and everything. So the point is, the parenting styles that we have received, because they're different, it then becomes our responsibility as adults who are wives and who are entrusted with homes. The Bible says that, you know, a wise woman builds her house. And I believe that whenever it says that, it takes me back to, for you to be able to build the house, you first have to have self-awareness. And for you to be able to build a house, you have to have the necessary skills, because building a house marriage is an emotional journey, and the emotions are what will determine the health of the relationship. And if the emotional cord is faulty, and it affects the communication, because how we communicate is also affected by how safe we feel emotionally, then the relationship is just not going to be healthy. And it's going to be difficult for the wife to then be suitable, because you are then becoming a knife. But also, you know, these are things that they can be blind. But as I'm saying that, sometimes you feel like, you know, I'm doing this, but your spouse perceives you differently. That's why feedback in a relationship is important, you know, where your spouse can call you and say, you know what, love, I know you are trying, but you are impatient. I don't know why, or you are vengeful. There are people who are vengeful. You know, your spouse will hate that, and you're like, it's a month. I'm not gonna talk to him for 3 days. He will not say that. Those kinds of things. They are little foxes, but they play a huge role in relationships. Now, one thing that affect our interpersonal relationships is the expression of self. As we said, you need to be confident, you need to be self-aware in order to be self-expressive. And self-expressiveness, it doesn't have to be deep things. People think it's deep things. I'm like, where do you see us in 10 years? Where is your emotional this? Where is your emotional that? It has little to do with that, but it has more to do with someone who is self-aware and who's able to communicate their emotions in a way you don't break the other partner. I'll make an example. Like, because women are more emotional, it means that women are often they speak more when they're angry, right? And in what they say, sometimes emotions cloud judgment and therefore affects the deliberation of the message. So if in a relationship we are having a healthy communication would be saying, when you do this, I feel hurt. And by doing that, you are separating your partner from the mistake that they've made. Now, it's easier for the partner to be able to say, oh, I see what you mean, when you say that. Versus, now, there's a difference between defining your partner according to their mistakes and pointing out your spouse's mistakes and showing them how they make you feel, because then that's the most healthier thing of handling conflict. But because that's we have all these little foxes that exist from within us. They are little foxes, and therefore we are not able to even pick. Now the partner becomes defensive, conflict spiral, and then we forget all the principles that we've learned. We must be like Hannah, we must be like Ruth. Because guys, when conflict is flesh, marriage is flesh, it has to do with the soul. Whenever things happen, it's easy for us to fall back to where we to where we are more inclined. Spiritual people will go and pray because spiritual people know when to keep quiet, because the Bible says, the book of Proverbs says, you need to know. And the Bible says in the book of, I think it's the book of Proverbs, it says a wise woman builds her house, but a foolish woman, so it shows you the extent in which the tongue can break a house, even when you are not willing to. So the second one is attachment. I've already touched a bit on that one. And then there's coping mechanisms. So coping mechanisms also play a huge role because they also determine how well we can resolve conflict in a relationship. I'll make another example. I once saw a quote. I think I was watching a movie with Fireproof. And the principle for the firemen, but we're firefighting, the principle in that was that you never leave your partner in a fire. And to translate that, it basically means that whenever there is conflict, that's when your partner needs you the most. I think that's just what it meant to say. Whenever there's a fire in your house, in your relationship, you need to be able to not leave your partner in the fire, because that's when they need love the most. Now, for us to be able to attain those kinds of things and to know how to be, suitable helpers, is when we are aware and to communicate them. You tell your spouse, my emotions, they are crusher. I go into, defense mode. And everything that you say, I'm going to be defensive because you feel like I can attack. And that in itself is a level of honesty that is needed in a relationship. Because then if your partner knows, oh, my wife is struggling with 1, 2, 3, then they know how to love you better. They know where you need to be loved the most. They know what to pray for the most. So when they pray, they would say, God, please help my wife. She's struggling with 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But if we cannot know these things and have self-awareness of these things, we are just going to be creating counter patterns where, silent treatment. I mean, a lot of emotional regulation causes conflict. Conflict causes silent treatment. Silent treatment causes emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal causes further silent treatment, and then defensiveness. And then everyone who tries to address the conversation or the problem becomes an enemy, because then accountability can take to me, because I'm not in an emotional space where I'm able to see how you see. But once we try to evolve beyond that and to transition and to become better partners, then we are able to know, okay, I'm struggling with this because it comes from this. I mean, if your father is absent, and I know that it also affects, spirituality. People they were raised with, I'm not saying everyone, it's some research. It says that people they grew up with absent fathers. It speaks of fathers because they believe that fathers are they also have a role to play in a child's in a child's life. They were saying that women who grew up without fathers in the initial stages of their relationship with God, they struggle with trust because the role of a father is breaking that perception. So they don't know how to relate with God in a way. But then it also shows that these kinds of things, they are so broad, but at the same time, they affect relationships and marriage in a way. The woman would, be in a position where and blame a man in that state, right? Also, issues of emotion. I know that I've also touched a bit of emotional on emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is one of the key things that are necessary, because emotional regulation has to do with how you take in emotions, how you feel them, how you experience them, and how you process them. It doesn't say you have to be a rock and just not feel. I don't have emotions, I'm just quiet, I'm there. It says you can feel hurt, but in your head, don't hurt other people, and in your head, know how to pursue healing. Because once you are bleeding in a relationship, you become a wounded well. And now the spouse will then be drinking from someone who's wounded, and which is poisonous. We know people who are wounded, they become and how we have this. So there's always that conflict with emotions. It's important for us to regulate emotions and know how to communicate. I'm one of the people who believe that basadi are not as complicated as people think. Basadi are complicated. The only complication with women is that unlike men, we have created different colors of personality. And that's what makes us different. But at the end of the day, our emotional processing template is similar. How we think, similar. That's why most of the problems of women are the same. If someone answers the same head the way feeling is similar to pain because we are similar. That's how God has designed us. And we are emotional. That's how God has designed us. The last one is emotionally absent parents. But this one is a very hard one, because I know that, with Christians, God had to heal many Bazalwani of this one, because we are not coming from the same house. And with the house that you come from, I can only imagine someone also from a healthy household where they were helped to communicate emotions, they were helped to to be critically thinking, where you are able to know how to support and what is needed, to not doubt yourself, to be confident. And you get married to someone emotional where they come from, and in that kind of a relationship, it's where now you will be challenged, because you then have to support someone from an emotional level you have never tasted. And I think that's also where empathy comes in from in a relationship, to understand that now I'm different, my spouse is different, we're not the same person. And in issues of difference, we have to come to a point where we sit down and say, oh, we're not different, we're not different. What is normal for you is not normal for me. When you might feel going out and not calling me and coming back at Riyamata is normal, but that's not normal. Probably we have that modeled, but not to me. What I'm used to is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then it's a step in the right direction, because then you are able to communicate, okay, I understand where you are coming from. I understand how it has impacted you. But this is a point where we need to heal. This is a point where we need to transition and to try and be better partners. Even not for each other, but to be a better partner for yourself. And I believe that in a relationship, you cannot give to your partner what you cannot give to yourself, because then that's creating a wound within yourself. If how you speak to yourself, your internal voice, and I think this is something that I've actually learned with time, the tone of the voice that I use with myself is the same tone of voice that I use with my spouse. So every time if I make a mistake and I beat myself up and I'm like, I'm just a failure, it's easy for me to perceive my spouse in the same way, because that's how I see myself. The pattern of thinking has already been designed. And in those kinds of cases, it's also easier for you to reflect. So this is where now how you treat your spouse becomes a reflection of how you treat yourself, which is very common. You You are untrusting because you don't trust. Generally, you are not the trusting person. Then you don't trust your spouse because you are not used. It's a language that is foreign to you as a person. So with the attachment styles, this is one of my favorite topics because I feel like it plays a huge role in relationships. With attachment styles, there are 4, as I've already mentioned. There's secure, there's anxious, there's avoidant, there's fearful. The most common in women is anxious. The most common in men is avoidant. So anxious has its own traits. Avoidance has its own traits. I have 5 minutes left. Has its own traits. Now, with a lot of people, the secure attachment style is very rare because secure means you have low anxiety, you have low avoidance, you know how to communicate, you are self-aware, you are assertive, you know your needs, you know how to communicate them, you know how to emotionally regulate. So within a relationship context, you know how to reciprocate in a way that is healthy and in a way it advocates for peace. It doesn't cause conflict. And then we have the anxious ones. By long they have a very sensitive nervous system. By long overthink. They have high anxiety. But overthink. They need constant reassurance. Do you love me? They want reassurance, and they struggle with communicating because they are not used to communicating because subconsciously they feel they're going to lose you as a spouse. So for them to not lose you, they would rather act out what they feel instead of coming in communicating it. I'll make an example. Maybe you need help with the dishes. Instead of you coming in and saying, love, can you please help me with the dishes? I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have a lot of work, blah, blah. You would then go and do the dishes and say, no one wants to help me. You guys, you are burdening me. But you're not communicating. You are acting out, but not communicating. Because there's a certain level of anxiety and of a fear of abandonment. If they know these are my needs, they might feel they can't meet them and therefore leave. So to secure relationships or to secure marriage, you end up giving your spouse mask you give them pieces of what they need to believe you to be, but they will never really know you because you fear knowing you will result in them eventually leaving, And I think with this one also, they're highly emotional, like highly people are anxiously attached. They are highly emotional because everything hits back to rejection. Everything hits back to, I want to cling. So the moment there's conflict, they want closeness emotionally. And people who are anxious, most of the time, they're never with people who are secure, which is very tricky because I get to hit the The third one is avoidant. The avoidant ones is South African men or men globally, African men generally, because with African culture, I think men were raised in a way emotional vulnerability is not seen as a thing. It's seen as, being weak, there are labels, and therefore they have been conditioned to think, emotions, logic. But it also exists in women, which is shocking, The women by long they find themselves with, where they're uncomfortable with intimacy, they don't trust, they're just too independent, and, they just detach. So, how emotions, shut down or ignore. We have women like that. And also the other one, which is fearful, I know that it's also called disorganized, which is high anxiety and high avoidance. These ones are a combination of anxious and avoidant, but at a higher degree, because with them, they have unresolved trauma. Like that, whenever they experience something, they become severely traumatized. And you might think, oh, we're overreacting, but they're not overreacting. Some of these people, they struggle with processing emotions, so they are easily scarred. And most of them, they have a negative self-talk. So they don't think positively about themselves. And the reason I'm sharing these things is because it exists so much in women, and it's not men. A lot of women by long they understand or they know that they have these attachment styles. So I think as I'm about to close, I think the homework or the takeaway from this session would just be that let's go to our private spaces and research which attachment style am I, how does it manifest? What attachment style is my spouse? Because in a relationship, that's very important. That's the first thing that should be checked to say the attachment styles are negating because it also play a role. If anxious is with avoidant, during conflict, anxious is going to want to talk for 5 hours about an issue as a facing. They would want intimacy, they would want more reassurance. And an avoidant will feel, oh, you talk too much, or complain, just leave me. So the avoidant will be overwhelmed and feeling like and the anxious will feel, oh, you are neglecting me, which then confirms the fears that they have for, oh, on. And then they spiral, they overthink, they have an emotional breakdown. While the avoidant will then detach and feel like, I just need to resolve this. I need to be alone in my independent, safe space and process and suppress all these emotions and act like they don't exist, and then go back to my wife or go back to my husband. And when they arrive, the anxious spouse is still there, overthinking, divorce court. So the takeaway would be that, marriage is an institution, and marriage is so important because I feel the companionship that comes with a marriage makes life a little bit easier because, even though the order of God means the woman has to submit, the man has to lead, but even in that setup, it makes life so much easier because, it's something also like the Bible says every good and perfect thing comes from the Lord, and marriage in itself as an institution comes from God, therefore making it perfect. So even though it's perfect and, it's something it's a blessing, but there are so many things they happen, the little foxes that happen within the marriage, they endanger the health of the marriage. And for a healthy marriage to strive, there has to be self-awareness, and there has to be willingness to learn for, okay, this is my story, this is where I come from, this is what I am now, this is what I'm struggling with, and this is what I need to deal with. This is how I am, this is how I grew up. Just deal with it. When you go, with the moment you get to a level where you think, I need to transition and I need to work on myself and become a healthier version of me, the more you find ways of giving a healthier version of yourself to your partner, because I believe our partners deserve that. As a person, you deserve to give yourself a healthy version of you, and your spouse also deserves to experience a version of you that evolves, healing. And with these things, the way that attachments are, it's easier to go, it's possible to go from anxious to secure. You just need to be aware of them, to know the traits, that then to know what triggers, to know triggers. There are triggers in there as well. To know the triggers, to know how to process the triggers, to know how to identify the emotions. It also goes back to communication. Instead of just feeling emotions and spiraling out of control, to pause and think to yourself, what am I feeling? Am I angry because I feel unheard? Do I feel unseen? Do I feel unwanted? The moment you contextualize your emotions, the easier they are to process, because you can't process what you don't know. If how feel emotion, you just boom, noise, you don't have time to process. But if has no feeler, like when you feel angry at your husband, you're able to pause and say, Bon, how would I know I feel disrespected? Or how would I know I feel unheard? Or I don't feel understood. It gives the emotion context, and therefore taking you one step closer to the solution, because your spouse will be able to say, oh, okay, but remember that self-awareness does not mean your spouse automatically medicine or change, because remember, it's dual. Your struggles, your partner also has their struggles. But the good thing with the marriage is what you learn, you're able to share, to say, what's what I've learned, how do you see me? Okay, let me tell you how I see you. Feedback in a relationship, I think when short term party, and even you don't know how to communicate. So how can we deal with that? How can we? It's a marriage. Marriage is school. It's grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. This year you are struggling with finance. After 2 years, you are blessed financially. You struggle like something else. You struggle like parenting, or you struggle like financial management. With relationships, there's always going to be something that you need to deal with. That's why you need to be a team and learn how to attack. You identify the emotion, you attack the situation, but to understand that I don't leave my spouse in the fire. And then I believe that's how we can build healthy marriages. And I'm out of time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Wow, what a content. Thank you so much, woman of God. You really help us. I think we need more of this. I'm just going to open the floor to question and answer. If you have any question, please raise your hand or you can unmute and just ask. Thank you. Okay, let me just go to my and see if there are any hands. Any questions, ladies? Was it clear? So our lecture tonight was good. That let me check the chat box. Okay, I only see comments. You can't process what you don't know. Multiple versions of yourself as experienced by others. Amen. Doesn't seem like we have questions. Bazalwane, I can't see hands, so if you have, you will just unmute. Then we can carry on. All right, women of God, thank you so much for sharing this. I believe that we also need more of the teaching tonight. Most of us are not aware of, we're not self-aware, and therefore that affects our spouse. And I just want us to go and pray. Also allow God to help you do self-introspection and seek help. We've got professionals who can assist us in our marriages. Certain things that we are dealing with, they're not necessarily spiritual, but these are childhood traumas that we have to overcome. The parenting style, as she mentioned, that, it really affected us. So we need to deal with those, even our partners, we need to deal with those. But why mono so? It's how they have been raised, and you pray and you pray, but because you do not know the root cause of the problem, you pray amiss. Instead of seeking counsel or professional help so that you can pray about something that we just pray amiss. We feel like they're just being abusive or they don't love us enough. And I want us to pray for that wisdom. God has given us psychologists, counselors, therapists for a reason, to help us. And I believe that if we get the help that we need, then we are able to build our marriages. For as long as we do not know who we are, we do not know self, we're not self-aware, we will keep on, moving around the same cycle year in, year out, praying over the same thing year in, year out, because we do not understand or know the root cause of the problem. And the Bible also stated, my people perish because they lack knowledge. For as long as you lack knowledge, eternally, like the spiritual part of marriage, when you do not know what you are fighting with in your marriage, be it the generational curses, what has been spoken against your marriage, the grandfathers or mothers, whoever said whatever concerning your marriage, if you do not know what you are fighting for, you will continuously pray amiss. So we are going to pray tonight, Ori. May the Lord help us. May the Lord reveal to us. May the Lord give us wisdom also to find the right people, counselors, therapists, psychologists, to really help us as we build our marriages. She mentioned, Ori, marriage is a school. When you think you have graduated, you're just starting, you feel like you're restarting, you're starting all over again. It's a new chapter of your life. It's a new class, new syllabus. It changes all the time, and we need to really be wise around it. As the Bible says, a wise woman build her house. So I'm just going to ask us to unmute, and we are all going to pray and just to thank God for such a session such as this, that we get to receive such content for free. We are really blessed. We are honored as suitable helpers. Let us all unmute and we begin to pray. Father, in the mighty name of Jesus.